The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with an almost tangible hum, the air thick with the voices of dignitaries from 37 advanced species. A tension that hadn't existed before filled the room, as if everyone had realized they were about to hear something strange, something that might fundamentally alter the course of intergalactic diplomacy. Ambassador Rodriguez stood at the center of the chamber, her posture straight, her expression calm, yet laced with a hint of a smirk. The towering insectoid counselor, Zix, who represented the Vexcar species, chittered in what could only be described as exasperation. His multiple sets of mandibles clicked furiously as his many eyes blinked with disbelief. Ambassador Rodriguez, what exactly did you expect would happen when you classified humans as a non-combatant species? Zix's words echoed in the vast chamber. Rodriguez couldn't help but laugh lightly, her voice a sharp contrast to the tension around her. With all due respect, Counselor Zix, she began, her tone light yet firm, you essentially told an entire species of problem solvers that they weren't allowed to solve problems. What did you think would happen? The room fell silent, with various species consulting their databases, some struggling to interpret the strange, human way of reasoning. It was a tactic humanity had employed many times. When faced with a challenge, they found a way around it through ingenuity and creativity. Zix's antenna twitched, his irritation growing palpable. You found a loophole, he hissed, his voice rising. Your species was specifically instructed not to intervene in military matters. The non-combatant classification was meant to keep you out of conflicts. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow, tapping the edge of her data pad. And yet, you said we couldn't fight. You never actually said anything about preventing others from fighting. Technically, we haven't violated any terms of the classification. As the display sheet activated appeared above the center of the chamber, a series of incidents involving human peacekeepers flashed on the hologram, images of human crews reprogramming cleaning bots to spray both sides of a conflict with neon-colored dye, diplomatic teams settling border disputes through what could only be described as unconventional methods, and a logistics officer bringing an entire space station siege to an end by introducing competitive baking. Rodriguez's smile widened as she added, in fact, we've made your lives a little easier by finding solutions you couldn't even imagine. Your methods, Zix sneered, are unorthodox and destabilizing to established diplomatic protocols. Rodriguez crossed her arms. Ah, yes, the protocol that led to a 3-century war between the Proxima Coalition and the Taurian League, resolved only last month by a human custodial team who convinced both sides to settle their differences with a modified version of Earth's Olympics. That protocol. The room erupted into murmurs. The mention of such a ridiculous solution, the humans had somehow turned an ancient, sacred conflict into a glorified game of sports, was almost too absurd to consider. One counselor, a gelatinous being named Blorp, wobbled indignantly. That was a sacred conflict based on deeply held cultural beliefs, he muttered. Right, Rodriguez nodded. A war that started because neither side could agree on the proper protocol for apologizing after accidentally stepping on each other's tentacles at a diplomatic function. And now they've established an interspecies sports league. Zix's antenna drooped as he struggled to process the numbers flashing on the hologram. But the results, what does that have to do with diplomacy? Rodriguez was unfazed, her confidence unwavering. Everything. You have to understand, diplomacy isn't just about following the old rules. It's about solving problems in the way that works. Sometimes that means doing the unexpected. Think about it, peace through cooperation, through shared experiences, through creating connections. Connections, Zix muttered, his voice trembling slightly. But these are not traditional diplomatic methods. Rodriguez smiled. Exactly, because humanity isn't about tradition. We're about breaking the mold. And that's why our creative peacekeeping methods have been so successful. I'm not convinced. Zix hissed. I want to know what you'll do next, Ambassador. Rodriguez's smile grew as she tapped her data pad, setting a new projection into motion. I'm glad you asked. With a sweep of her hand, a new initiative appeared on the holographic display, Operation Galactic Survivor, Diplomatic Edition. The crowd murmured again, but this time with an undeniable interest and a hint of fear. Inside the Galactic Council chamber, a tension unlike anything Ambassador Rodriguez had ever experienced hung in the air. Her holographic display flickered with images of human peacekeeping solutions. A massive pie-eating contest in the middle of a planetary dispute, a series of colorful cleaning robots carefully painting the walls of a war zone, while both factions bickered over trade routes, and the infamous cultural timeshare agreement between two ancient enemies settled over a weekend seminar on Earth's concept of relaxation. Counselor Zix's antennae twitched in what could only be described as barely contained fury. He leaned forward, mandibles clicking in rapid succession, clearly attempting to suppress the urge to lash out verbally. Ambassador Rodriguez, he said, his voice dripping with venom. You stand here before this esteemed council, presenting the farce that is your species' peacekeeping tactics, competitive baking, cleaning bots with paint sprayers? What next? A musical number to resolve interstellar conflict. Rodriguez, completely unfazed, met his angry compound eyes with a calm smile, the kind she had honed over years of facing adversarial negotiations and galactic bureaucracy. She raised one hand, the holographic display pausing on the image of two species in a heated debate over a trade agreement, only to have it hilariously diverted by a baking contest where both sides were forced to create a cake that best represented their cultural identity. Actually, Counselor, she replied smoothly, that musical number you just mentioned isn't far off. In fact, it's one of our most successful peace initiatives. Sometimes, when two sides are entrenched in their beliefs, they need something unexpected to break the cycle, something that forces them to engage with each other in a way that feels safe. The chamber was silent. Alien dignitaries of all shapes, sizes, and biologies sat motionless, their attention rapt. Rodriguez was no stranger to shock value, but she could sense the council was beginning to shift in their perspective. Counselor Zix sputtered, clearly struggling to comprehend the absurdity of it all. This is not how diplomacy is done. You're playing games with the galaxy's most serious matters. Rodriguez tilted her head slightly, a glint of humor flashing in her eyes. Well, Counselor, we're playing games, yes, but so far, our methods have resulted in a 78% higher resolution rate compared to traditional diplomatic means. She gestured toward the large holographic screen, which began cycling through statistics, conflict resolution rates, economic agreements reached, treaties signed, all thanks to unorthodox methods. It turns out that sometimes the most serious problems can't be solved by more seriousness. She could see the room shift, some species leaning forward, intrigued by the data. Others seemed caught between disbelief and reluctant curiosity. A few appeared to be rethinking their stance, their previous skepticism waning as they processed the implications of what Rodriguez was saying. Let's consider the situation with the Taurian League and the Proxima Coalition, Rodriguez continued, tapping on her data pad. Another hologram flickered to life, showing the peaceful coexistence between two previously warring species. After centuries of conflict, it wasn't a fleet of warships or strategic alliances that ended their war. It was an Earth-inspired competition, an Olympic-style event. They settled their differences through sports, not force. She let the words sink in. The chamber, once filled with the hum of quiet murmurs, now felt like a pressure cooker, with every delegate processing the radical shift in approach. Rodriguez paused, locking eyes with Counselor Zix, who was visibly twitching with impatience, his mandibles clicking furiously as he attempted to wrap his mind around what he was hearing. We didn't violate the non-combatant status you gave us. In fact, We've done exactly what you asked. We've kept the peace. It's just that our version of peace isn't bound by your traditional methods. We've realized that sometimes the best way to get two people to agree is to make them laugh, or dance, or bake a really, really big cake. I don't believe this, Zix muttered under his breath before addressing the council once again, his tone dripping with frustration. This madness cannot be allowed to continue. We cannot have the fate of the galaxy determined by Earth's absurdities. Rodriguez smirked slightly. Well, Counselor, the numbers don't lie. Perhaps it's time for the galaxy to admit that our methods, as unconventional as they may be, are working. She raised her chin, her voice carrying through the chamber. After all, we've managed to bring species together who have been at war for centuries. That, I believe, is the real power of humanity. As the murmurs in the chamber swelled into a cacophony, Rodriguez couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction. She was used to walking the tightrope of diplomacy, but today she was setting the stage for something bigger, a new era of intergalactic relations, where peace didn't just have to be the absence of conflict. It could be the presence of joy, creativity, and yes, even a little chaos. Counselor Zix's antennae drooped, the fight draining from him as he struggled to come up with a rebuttal. The council chamber, once filled with tension and distrust, was now buzzing with something else, curiosity. You'll regret this, Zix finally spat, his voice a mere whisper beneath the growing noise of the council. Or maybe we won't, Rodriguez said, her smile wide and confident. Either way, the galaxy is about to learn that peace doesn't have to be boring. The Galactic Council Chamber was now an arena for a new kind of contest, one that had evolved from human ingenuity, creativity, and perhaps most importantly, a sense of humor that was proving to be a wild card. Today, Ambassador Rodriguez stood at the podium again, this time with a new holographic display that made even the most seasoned diplomats raise an eyebrow. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed delegates, Rodriguez began, her voice light but authoritative. After the success of our previous conflict resolution programs, we're introducing something truly groundbreaking, the Great Galactic Bake-Off. A soft ripple of murmurs filled the room. Rodriguez's eyes sparkled as she gestured to the large screen that now displayed images of interspecies baking teams working together in kitchens, some species with tentacles, others with no hands at all, yet all seemingly focused on creating the perfect pie. I know what you're all thinking, Rodriguez continued. Baking? For diplomacy? But yes, you heard it right. This program aims to bring species together, fostering collaboration through the universal love of food. As she spoke, the screen shifted to show footage of various species from the Proxima Coalition and the Andromedan Alliance carefully decorating cakes, with even the most war-hardened species awkwardly trying to create intricate sugar flowers, much to their own bemusement. You see, food is not just sustenance. It's culture, it's history, and most importantly, it's a conversation starter, Rodriguez said, the chamber falling into a thoughtful silence. When we broke the ice with the Drachnid and the Vesson factions through a shared experience in the kitchen, we saw something amazing happen. Their representatives started talking, laughing, and sharing stories about their food traditions. And in that moment, the war between them seemed not only distant but absurd. Rodriguez's words hung in the air as the council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly torn between skepticism and curiosity. A war over a misunderstanding in culinary etiquette, Zix said flatly, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You expect us to solve galactic conflicts with cakes. Not just cakes, Counselor, Rodriguez countered with a grin. We've incorporated cultural challenges, like baking the perfect bread, without any ingredients familiar to either species. You'd be surprised how quickly people start asking questions about each other's cultures when they're forced to think about the ingredients in their kitchens. Rodriguez clicked a button on her pad, and a hologram of a sparkling cake appeared on the screen, surrounded by different species standing in a row, holding up their creations. she turned to face the council. And what happened? Instead of a war over resources, they had a bake-off. And guess what? A peace treaty followed. Zix sputtered in disbelief. A peace treaty? Because of cake. Rodriguez smiled, undeterred. Well, not just because of cake, but it was the catalyst. You see, the human approach to peace is simple. We believe that finding common ground, whether it's shared laughter, a mutual love of food, or even an absurdly competitive baking contest, is the key to lasting relationships. The council chamber remained still, the silence punctuated only by the occasional hum of translation devices. Rodriguez was on the offensive now, and the results were undeniable. The Arcturus mercenary fleet, Rodriguez continued, changing the subject to a more neutral topic, has even joined the fun. They've provided food for the winners of the first few events. Can you imagine that? The ones who were once feared for their combat prowess are now baking cookies with their rivals. There was a collective pause, followed by what could only be described as a hesitant chuckle from one of the Zayton delegates. This was quickly followed by a ripple of nervous laughter among the other species, a sound Rodriguez had been hoping for. Now, don't get me wrong, Rodriguez continued, her tone light. It's not just about food. The Galactic Bake-Off is just one example of how we can create lasting connections by thinking outside of our typical boundaries. Through something as simple as a shared cultural experience, we're able to make enemies into partners. Counselor Zix's antennae twitched, and Rodriguez could sense the frustration beneath his quiet mask of professionalism. But this was not the first time she had been in this position. Diplomacy was about being persistent, about driving change with a combination of patience, logic, and, when necessary, absurdity. As you can see from these statistics, she continued, pulling up the latest data. Our resolution rates have skyrocketed. Conflicts that would have lasted decades are now being solved in months. And while we certainly still face challenges, the results speak for themselves. The holographic display now showed a graph of rapidly decreasing military expenditures across multiple sectors, with increases in collaborative efforts and joint scientific research taking their place. Zix, while still visibly displeased, could not argue with the data. His antennae flicked with growing unease, and Rodriguez saw the wheels turning in his mind. He was no fool. He knew there was merit to what she was saying. I will admit, Zix said, his tone grudging but sincere, there is something to be said for your methods, Ambassador. But this still seems unconventional. Unconventional, yes, Rodriguez replied, her smile widening. But sometimes the most effective solutions are the ones that take us out of our comfort zones. So to the Council I say this. Humanity doesn't just solve problems, we solve them in creative ways. And with our creative peacekeeping, we're showing that diplomacy isn't always about force or compromise. Sometimes it's about the willingness to meet each other where we least expect it. The chamber fell into a heavy silence once again. Rodriguez knew that her next steps would be crucial. The Council had been skeptical at first, but their minds were beginning to shift. And in diplomacy, that was half the battle. Zix's voice, however, sliced through the silence once more, though this time it lacked the sharp edge of earlier. Fine, Ambassador, he said, his mandibles twitching. But know this. If you fail, if this creativity leads to more chaos instead of peace, there will be no excuses left. Rodriguez held his gaze, her expression calm and unyielding. Understood, Counselor, but I assure you, the only thing we'll be baking in the future is peace. And with that, the council chamber was once again filled with quiet murmurs, some skeptical, others hopeful. The seeds of a new type of diplomacy had been planted. Now it was just a matter of whether the galaxy was ready to embrace them. The Galactic Council chamber was in an uproar as Ambassador Rodriguez's holographic display faded, leaving the delegates staring at one another in stunned silence. She stood calmly, hands clasped behind her back, a slight smirk playing on her lips. The silence was thick with confusion, skepticism, and the faintest traces of admiration from some of the counselors. Rodriguez had just unveiled her most unconventional solution yet, Galactic Survivor Diplomatic Edition, an event designed not only to resolve diplomatic issues, but to do so in a manner that was completely and utterly human. The idea of solving interspecies conflicts through competitive performance art and reality TV had left some of the counselors speechless, while others were visibly fighting the urge to scream. You cannot be serious. Counselor Zix, the towering insectoid delegate from the Vexor system, finally sputtered, his antenna twitching in outrage. This is a mockery of everything the council stands for. You cannot reduce diplomacy to a game show. Ambassador Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Why not? She asked, her tone laced with mock innocence. If a baking competition can resolve centuries-old feuds, then why not a little interpretive dance to settle a trade dispute? Have you seen the dance-off between the Drachnid and Vossen delegations? It's now a cultural milestone. Another murmur spread through the chamber. Some species were consulting their data pads, trying to understand the logic behind this absurd new approach. Others, like the gelatinous blorp, appeared to be mentally preparing for a nervous breakdown. You actually used a dance-off to resolve a diplomatic conflict. Blorp's voice wavered with disbelief. Rodriguez's grin widened. Absolutely. And it worked. It got the job done. And now there's peace where there used to be war. Isn't that what we all want? The chamber fell into silence once more. It wasn't the silence of contempt. It was something else. For the first time, some of the counselors were forced to admit that perhaps, just perhaps, this human approach was more effective than their traditional methods. The statistics didn't lie, after all. Look, Rodriguez continued, now pacing in front of the counselors. We humans aren't the best at sticking to the old rules. We don't have centuries of tradition behind us, but we do have creativity. We have an unparalleled ability to think outside the box. Or in this case, the peace treaty. She pointed to the holographic display again, showing footage of the most recent diplomatic interventions, humans intervening in military conflicts by reprogramming cleaning bots to shower both warring sides in neon pink paint, organizing planetary boundary disputes by introducing the concept of time-sharing vacation properties, and most recently, using baking competitions to resolve a centuries-old dispute over mining rights. I know it's not conventional, Rodriguez said, now turning to face the chamber full of alien dignitaries. But look at the results. Our peacekeepers have a 78% higher success rate in resolving conflicts than the galactic average, and that includes a much higher level of stability in the regions we've worked in. Counselor Zix clicked his mandibles in frustration. This is not diplomacy, Ambassador. This is creative peacekeeping, Rodriguez interrupted smoothly. We don't need to follow old patterns when those patterns have failed us. The galaxy is tired of fighting, but no one knows how to stop. We show them how. Through dance, through cooking, through a little bit of humor and a whole lot of creativity. Zix seethed, his antenna vibrating with agitation. This is absurd. You are turning diplomacy into entertainment. Rodriguez's expression softened, as if seeing this as an opportunity to drive home her point. Isn't it exactly what the galaxy needs, though? Entertainment with meaning. We entertain and we heal. We bring laughter and creativity where there was once conflict. The Council says it wants peace, but no one knows how to achieve it. Humans do, and we're offering it on a stage. She turned back to the display, which now showed a live feed of the most recent galactic reality diplomacy show. Two feuding civilizations were now engaging in a competitive baking contest, both sides attempting to make the best pie to seal the new peace agreement. Zix looked at the screen, his antenna drooping slightly. This is absurd. Rodriguez smiled again. Perhaps, but it works. And that's the part one think you're missing. It works. You'll see. Just wait until our next program. Another wave of murmurs spread across the council chamber, and for the first time, Rodriguez could feel a shift in the air. The skepticism was still there, but beneath it was something new, a sense of intrigue. Maybe, just maybe, this crazy human idea was something worth exploring. Look, Rodriguez said, leaning forward slightly. You want peace, right? Then let's find a way to make it happen. Together, through collaboration, through understanding. And if we have a little fun along the way, well, that's just a bonus. A low, collective sigh filled the room, but there was something different about it now. It wasn't just a sigh of frustration. There was the faintest thread of reluctant curiosity. The council was listening, even if they didn't fully understand. And that, Rodriguez knew, was half the battle won. The galactic council chamber was filled with a tense, uncertain silence. Ambassador Rodriguez stood at the center of the chamber, a calm smile on her face as she observed the various species around her, each trying to process the events of the last few weeks. The proposal she'd introduced had, predictably, caused a stir, but it had also accomplished something no one had expected: peace. Ambassador Rodriguez, came the voice of Counselor Zix, his antennae twitching with both curiosity and lingering annoyance. You seem to suggest that your people resolved an interstellar conflict without firing a single shot. Please explain to us how that could possibly be true. Rodriguez maintained her composure, unfazed by the incredulous stares from the gathered dignitaries. I'm glad you asked, Counselor, she said smoothly, because I'd love to explain it to you. She gestured to the holographic display behind her. It shimmered into life, showing a detailed map of the Caldori-Selvian border, a sector that had been at war for centuries. The two species had been engaged in a bitter conflict over territory and resources, a situation that had escalated so far that peace talks had become almost impossible. But what you see here is different, Rodriguez continued, her fingers dancing through the air as she manipulated the map. What you see is a plan that did not involve military intervention. It didn't involve bombings, occupation, or threats. It didn't even involve a ceasefire agreement. No, instead, we used something that every species in this room can relate to: competition. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Zix's antennae twitched again, but he didn't interrupt. The Caldori and the Selvians both have a rich history of intellectual achievement and a deep pride in their respective cultures, Rodriguez continued. Instead of sitting down to another round of negotiations that would inevitably break down, we offered them a challenge, one based on their strengths, something that couldn't be ignored. She swiped the display, and the holographic image shifted to show two factions, each representative team in their traditional uniforms, standing in front of a gigantic display of technology. The Caldori are known for their strategic brilliance, and the Selvians for their advanced environmental engineering. So we proposed a competition, a joint engineering project to create a sustainable, self-sufficient habitat capable of sustaining life on a hostile moon. The assembly was now focused on the image. They watched as the two species, once bitter enemies, worked together, their scientific minds locked in friendly yet fierce competition. The Caldori team built complex defense systems, while the Selvians engineered solutions for growing food in an uninhabitable environment. It was not a war, it was a race. A race to see who could contribute more to a peaceful and sustainable future. Rodriguez continued. The rules were simple: no sabotage, no weapons, only collaboration. The winning team would have their design implemented on the moon, and the losers would contribute their resources to the project. The goal was to create something that benefited both species. As the display flickered to life again, the council saw the final result: a harmonious, integrated settlement where both species had contributed in equal measure. The habitat had been built with a blend of Caldori defense technologies and Selvian environmental engineering, and it stood as a symbol of what could be accomplished when former enemies worked together. The project was completed in record time, Rodriguez said, her voice laced with pride. And do you know what the best part was? There was no bloodshed, no threats of violence, no loss of life, just a competition that turned into a partnership. Zix's antennae flickered again, this time with visible contemplation. You're suggesting that this competition, this game of sorts, has solved a centuries-old conflict? He asked, his tone skeptical but intrigued. Not just solved it, Rodriguez replied. It's transformed it. What started as a war over resources turned into a shared vision for the future. Both species now see each other as partners, not enemies. And the best part is, we didn't just stop there. This isn't a one-time thing. The Caldori and the Selvians are already planning their next collaboration, this time on renewable energy technology. She let that sink in, letting the council digest what she had just said. And what's more, she added, our galactic games model is already being adopted in other sectors. The Andromedans and the Drade Empire are about to embark on a similar competition to settle a long-standing border dispute. They'll be creating a joint research station in the Lyra Nebula, and the prize is the rights to the first shared resources on that station. Rodriguez allowed herself a moment of satisfaction as the council processed the implications of what she had presented. Zix's mandibles clicked together, a sound that usually indicated frustration, but this time it seemed like a sign of deep thought. Ambassador, he said after a long pause, while your methods are unconventional, I cannot deny that the results speak for themselves. But there are still concerns about the long-term impact of your competitions. What happens when species begin to rely on these methods instead of traditional diplomacy? Rodriguez smiled, unfazed by the question. Then they'll have learned something we've known all along, that diplomacy doesn't have to be a battle of wills or threats. It can be a celebration of what makes us unique and a demonstration of what we can achieve together. Competition, in its purest form, isn't about winning at all costs. It's about mutual growth. The council was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Rodriguez allowed them a moment to consider the implications. And the best part, she continued, her voice casual, is that none of this would have happened if you hadn't classified us as non-combatants. You gave us the space to be creative, to think outside the box, and to show you that peace doesn't always require the use of force. Sometimes it just requires a little imagination. Zix's antennae drooped slightly, but there was a glint in his multifaceted eyes. You've certainly made your point, Ambassador. Perhaps we have underestimated you. Rodriguez smiled. Perhaps. With that, the council was left to ponder not only the effectiveness of humanity's methods, but also the profound shift in how diplomacy could be carried out in the galaxy. What started as a simple classification had led to a revolution in peaceful conflict resolution. As the chamber erupted into quiet conversations, Rodriguez took a moment to look out over the room. She knew this was just the beginning. The human approach to peacekeeping had turned an entire galaxy's concept of conflict resolution on its head, and the best part was, no one saw it coming. Ambassador Rodriguez stood before the Galactic Council again, this time with a smile that was both confident and calculated. The chamber was packed, as it always was when the humans were in attendance. But today, the air was different. It was charged, expectant, as if something monumental was about to unfold. Various alien species, some with limbs folded and others vibrating with anticipation, stared down at the display in front of them. Members of the Galactic Council, Rodriguez began, her voice carrying through the large chamber. Humanity's greatest strength has always been our creativity. And what better way to demonstrate our ability to solve problems than through the universal language of entertainment? A holographic display flickered to life behind her, showing the logo for a new initiative, Strategic Peace Through Entertainment. There was a moment of silence, followed by an immediate buzz of confusion. Some of the more traditionally minded species were clearly uncomfortable. Others, more curious, leaned forward, intrigued. "Allow me to explain," Rodriguez continued, maintaining her trademark confident demeanor. "For centuries, humanity has resolved conflicts not only through force but through cooperation and shared experiences. But we've come to realize that peace doesn't have to come at the cost of suffering or war. Sometimes it can come through a little creativity." The holographic display shifted, showing examples of human-led peacekeeping operations. One video displayed a conflict between two war-torn alien factions, which had been resolved by a galaxy-wide game show competition, featuring a bizarre but effective mix of traditional games, cross-species cooperation, and creative collaboration. Rodriguez smiled as she let the footage play. By using games, entertainment, and even something as simple as dancing, humans have managed to bring about peaceful resolutions that the Council could never have anticipated. You see, when people compete or cooperate in a non-hostile setting, it fosters a kind of trust, something traditional diplomacy can struggle to achieve. She switched the display to a new image, a group of vastly different species participating in what looked like an impromptu cooking competition. The scene was chaotic, with massive ovens and strange ingredients flying through the air, but the participants were laughing, cooking, and sharing techniques. "This is the Great Galactic Bake-Off," Rodriguez announced, "an initiative we introduced to ease tensions between the Vegan Trade Federation and the Taurian League. What began as a competition to bake the best pastries quickly turned into a cultural exchange. Now, they have joint ventures in agriculture and have signed peace treaties, all over a shared love of baking." Councillor Zix's antennae twitched in disbelief. "You want us to believe that humans have used baking competitions to promote peace?" Rodriguez's smile widened. "Why, yes, Councillor. But that's not all. We've successfully resolved border disputes through dance-offs, provided conflict resolution in hotly contested sectors through improv theater, and brought warring factions to the table over a good old-fashioned game of charades." The room erupted in a mixture of disbelief and suppressed amusement. One councillor, a large gelatinous being, vibrated with concern. "This is absurd. Peace through entertainment? You cannot be serious." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "You think this is absurd? Tell me, how many centuries of diplomacy has it taken for your species to arrive at a resolution for your territorial disputes with the Drakari? And how many lives were lost in the process?" The room fell silent, the implication clear. Zix's compound eyes blinked rapidly, processing the data. It wasn't just the entertainment value that was at stake, it was the efficacy of human methods. "We've found," Rodriguez said, her voice soft but unwavering, "that by turning peace into something enjoyable, people begin to see each other as equals. Competition can foster respect, and cooperation can turn rivals into allies. When we stop focusing on what divides us and start finding what we can share, we unlock the true power of peace." The holographic display shifted once more, showing a concerted effort by humans to bring peace to an entire sector by organizing a massive talent show featuring members of warring species. The final round had the species dancing together, learning each other's movements and rhythms, creating unity through shared expression. This isn't just diplomacy. This is cultural exchange at its finest, Rodriguez concluded. "We've learned that in a galaxy rife with tension, sometimes the best way to build peace is not through speeches or meetings, but through art, through expression, through the things that make us human." There was a beat of silence as the council members absorbed her words. Zix's antennae twitched again, this time in what could be called reluctant admiration. "So what exactly do you propose, Ambassador?" Councillor Blorp asked, his gelatinous form shifting nervously. Rodriguez's smile widened. "We propose a galactic peace tournament, a competition to showcase the best of each species' cultures, where we solve problems, settle disputes, and foster understanding. And just to spice things up, there'll be a dance-off. I promise, It's a lot more effective than you think. The council chamber erupted into murmurs of both disbelief and curiosity. The mood was no longer one of skepticism. It was one of anticipation, an uncertainty that could only come from something new, something unexpected. As Rodriguez watched, she couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. In a galaxy that had long relied on force, humanity had found a way to bring about peace, one dance step at a time. The sound of boots echoed in the hallways of the hospital as Staff Sergeant Lex Petrov moved through the chaos, her team in tow. Emergency lights flickered intermittently, casting an eerie red glow on the battered walls. The familiar smell of antiseptic mixed with smoke and burning debris, a constant reminder of the world outside. A few weeks ago, this place had been a sanctuary for the sick and wounded. Now, it had become a battlefield. Lex's combat medic unit had been thrust into the heart of the war, yet their mission remained the same: to heal, to save, to protect life where destruction seemed certain. "Status?" Lex asked as she checked her equipment, her voice steady despite the tension that radiated through her. Her team had been treating the wounded since the first explosion rocked the city, and they hadn't stopped moving since. "We've triaged the most critical," replied Sergeant Diaz, his face grim as he moved a patient onto a gurney. "But the situation's getting worse, Sergeant. More injuries keep coming in. There's no end in sight." Lex nodded, her heart heavy. She had spent most of her career in combat situations, but this was different. This wasn't about shooting or tactics. It was about saving lives, even in the middle of an invasion. And somehow, she knew that was why they were targeted first. Because in the eyes of the invaders, healers were the greatest threat. A low rumble shook the hospital once more, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire from the streets outside. The alien forces were closing in, and Lex's team had been holding the line with their medical expertise, their hands as skilled at stitching up wounds as they were at firing weapons when necessary. "Looks like the evac chopper's down," Lieutenant Martinez said, his voice tight with frustration. "We've got to get these patients out of here." Lex's eyes darted to the window, where the distant glow of alien ships hovered ominously in the sky, casting long shadows over the city. In the midst of the destruction, the priority was clear: get the wounded out, or they wouldn't survive the next attack. "We'll make it happen," Lex said, her voice like steel. "Gather supplies. We're not leaving anyone behind." But as her team prepared for the next phase of evacuation, something unexpected happened. The door to the emergency room swung open, and a group of civilian volunteers rushed in, wearing civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable look of medical professionals. They were not soldiers. They were not trained for combat. But here they were, risking their lives to help, to do what they could in the face of an enemy that had no respect for life. "Sergeant Petrov," one of them called out, breathless, "we're here to assist with triage and evacuation. We can help." Lex paused, her expression softening for just a moment. "I didn't expect volunteers." "You don't need to," the volunteer leader replied, eyes wide with urgency. "We're all you have left. Let us help." Lex gave a sharp nod. "Then let's get to work." As the team worked, patching up the injured and preparing them for transport, an eerie realization began to settle over Lex's mind. The invaders, who had hoped to break humanity's will by targeting hospitals, hadn't expected this response. They hadn't expected that humans could fight with more than just weapons. They hadn't anticipated the human spirit, the resilience to heal, to fight, and to protect, no matter the odds. The battle wasn't just being fought on the front lines anymore. It was happening in every hospital, every medical bay, every corner where humans and aliens alike sought refuge. The very act of healing had become an act of warfare, one that was proving more effective than any weapon. "We need to move quickly," Lex said, snapping her team back into focus. "Prepare for the next wave. We're not just saving lives, we're sending a message." As the last of the patients were loaded into evacuation transports, Lex could feel the shift in the air. The invaders may have underestimated humanity's resolve. But as the doors to the hospital closed, locking out the chaos, the mission had become clear. No matter what came next, the fight wasn't over. The atmosphere in the Galactic Council chamber was one of polite exhaustion. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of unconventional diplomacy and creative peacekeeping, and Ambassador Rodriguez was beginning to sense the collective weariness of her audience. As she stood before the counselors, her latest proposal was already set to be discussed. The holographic display behind her lit up with bright colors as it presented the ambitious concept, Operation Galactic Talent. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed representatives of the Galactic Council, Rodriguez began, her voice smooth but carrying the weight of urgency. Our peacekeeping efforts have been successful not because we have managed to outfight our opponents, but because we've learned to outcreate them. The aliens in the room, a patchwork of species from across the galaxy, exchanged uncertain glances. The concept I present today is simple. Let's harness the creativity of the galaxy's inhabitants. What better way to unite disparate species, dissolve tensions, and celebrate the value of life than through competitive performance art? The hologram behind her shifted to show colorful scenes of various species participating in different events, zero-gravity dance-offs, creative problem-solving competitions, and a chaotic but oddly moving display of musical collaborations between species that had previously been at war. This is Operation Galactic Talent, where each participating species will send their best performers, dancers, musicians, thinkers, athletes, and compete in a series of friendly challenges. What could be more unifying than performance? What could more symbolically capture our shared purpose in the galaxy than coming together to showcase our diversity, creativity, and cooperative spirit? A moment of silence passed in the chamber as the council members digested the idea. While we certainly appreciate the entertainment value of your proposal, Ambassador, came a voice from across the room, we have grave concerns. What happens when art is weaponized? What if your performance competition becomes just another tool for distraction, a vehicle for manipulation? Rodriguez smiled knowingly, raising her hand slightly as if to calm the room. Not at all, Counselor Zix, she said, her voice calm but firm. Operation Galactic Talent is not about manipulation or distraction. It is, however, about recognizing the incredible power of creative expression as a diplomatic tool. Music, art, dance, they all have the ability to change hearts and minds. They have brought peace to places where negotiation failed. The goal here is to show that we are more than the sum of our weapons. We are beings who can create just as much as we can destroy. Another wave of murmurs filled the room, but this time there were some nodding heads. Even the most skeptical members of the council couldn't deny that the idea of showcasing cooperation through artistic performance was a novel one, perhaps even revolutionary. Let us consider the proof, Rodriguez continued, her tone shifting slightly to a more persuasive cadence. Think of the Arcturus dance-off, a diplomatic event held just weeks ago, where two species that had been in an endless border dispute for centuries settled it by dancing it out. The tension between them melted away in an instant as they learned each other's cultural rhythms. In 2 hours, they negotiated a peace treaty that had eluded their governments for decades. She paused for effect, letting the council consider the implications of that success, or the Andromedan-Alethian musical collaboration, which not only produced a beautiful symphony, but also unlocked trade negotiations between two species whose economies had previously been at loggerheads. Now they are collaborating on resource-sharing initiatives. Rodriguez allowed her eyes to sweep the room, catching the attention of key counselors. I propose that Operation Galactic Talent will do for the galaxy what it has already done for individuals and species in isolated cases. It will create bonds, foster understanding, and maybe, just maybe, remind us all of what we stand to lose if we do not fight for peace. The silence in the room deepened, and then, slowly, the first signs of approval began to ripple through the crowd. It was subtle, a slight flicker in the movements of the council members, their antennae and tendrils shifting in acknowledgement of her words. Ambassador Rodriguez felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this would be the moment that truly changed the way the galaxy viewed peace. "We'll be watching closely, Ambassador," said Counselor Zix, his voice softer than usual. "But I suppose that, as always, humanity's approach will surprise us." Rodriguez allowed herself a smile as the holographic display began to fade, her proposal now in the hands of the Council. Ambassador Rodriguez stood at the heart of the Galactic Council chamber, ready to face an entirely new challenge. The lights dimmed, and a holographic display sparked to life above her, showing intricate data and complex negotiations between various species that had, until now, been embroiled in unresolvable disputes. This wasn't the usual diplomacy. This was something more artful. Rodriguez had studied the intricacies of negotiation and had learned to turn these meetings into performances, complex, creative, and unorthodox. She knew that to get the council on her side, she'd have to showcase not just logic and diplomacy, but creativity and vision. As the council members settled in, her display flickered to life, showing images of humans' most unexpected successes in negotiation, disputes solved with poetry, songs, and even interpretative dance. The chamber buzzed with confusion, but Rodriguez's smile only deepened. She wasn't just presenting solutions. She was demonstrating the power of negotiating through culture and creativity. With a flourish, she paused the display, turning to face the assembly. "The future of diplomacy," she began, "isn't just in what you say, but in how you make others feel. It's in the art of human expression, where compromise becomes not a task, but a work of art." The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with an energy that had not been felt in centuries. For eons, the galaxy had been governed by force, treaties signed in blood, and minds sharpened on the edge of war. Military might and traditional diplomacy were the pillars of intergalactic relationships, and any attempt to challenge that status quo was met with immediate resistance. But now, standing at the podium before the gathered delegates, Ambassador Rodriguez was about to do just that. She had redefined the very concept of peacekeeping with human ingenuity, turning diplomatic solutions into galactic entertainment. What began as an unexpected experiment with reality TV shows, cultural exchange, and competitive sports had grown into a movement, a revolution of peace so powerful that it had reshaped the political and social fabric of the galaxy. Rodriguez's recent success with human diplomacy, employing everything from competitive baking to interpretative dance to solve conflicts, had caught the attention of many, but it had also raised eyebrows. The Council, made up of 37 advanced species, had long viewed war as a necessary tool in maintaining peace and order across the stars. Now, a human was suggesting an entirely new way of conducting galactic affairs, one that involved no weapons, no bloodshed, and no destruction. "Honorable Council," Rodriguez began, her voice steady but carrying the weight of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. "What if I told you that the future of intergalactic conflict does not have to involve war at all? What if the galaxy could instead be united through a new form of competition, one based on collaboration, creation, and innovation?" There was a brief silence. The air in the chamber crackled with anticipation. Counselors exchanged looks, many raising their antennae or mandibles in skepticism. A few even whispered to their neighbors, unsure if they were hearing this correctly. Rodriguez continued, her confidence unwavering. "Our galaxy is riddled with centuries of conflict, old grudges, and an overwhelming reliance on military force to resolve disputes. But what if the greatest weapon of all could be something far simpler, something more humane? What if the true strength of a species could be measured not by its ability to destroy, but by its capacity to create, to solve problems, to innovate. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Take, for example, the recent Galactic Survivor Diplomatic Edition. That reality show, as you call it, it wasn't just entertainment. It was a carefully orchestrated test of cultural exchange and diplomacy, where the fiercest of enemies put aside their differences and competed in problem-solving challenges. And what happened? Peace where there was once war. Long-standing trade disputes resolved over a shared love of baking. Old territorial boundaries forgotten because two species learned to collaborate over musical performances. The chamber erupted in murmurs, some intrigued, others alarmed. Some counselors were clearly uneasy with the idea that something as frivolous as a cooking competition could resolve years of conflict. But Rodriguez wasn't deterred. There is more, she continued. The success of these programs has brought something unexpected. We've begun to see a shift in how species view themselves and each other. What was once seen as a necessary evil, war, has now become something no one wants. The latest data shows that sectors involved in our peacekeeping initiatives have experienced a 47% reduction in conflict-related incidents, while interspecies cooperation is at an all-time high. You all claim to seek peace, but this is the future of the galaxy. She clicked a button on her holographic pad, and the display shifted to show the latest statistics on peacekeeping success rates. A few of the more skeptical counselors leaned forward, intrigued despite themselves as the data proved her point. But even as they examined the figures, others raised concerns. But this is not traditional diplomacy, said Zix, the towering insectoid counselor, his voice echoing with a mix of disbelief and anger. You cannot simply replace our centuries of negotiation with games and competitions. You're reducing the complexity of galactic relations to entertainment. Rodriguez's smile was calm, almost amused. Is that what you think we've done? Reduced diplomacy to entertainment? We've simply adapted the tools at our disposal. Why rely on weapons when the galaxy can be won over with the power of innovation? With the right creative competition, we can solve problems faster than any military engagement ever could. Just think about it. How many times have we tried to resolve the same old conflicts with the same old methods, only for them to resurface years later? Our approach is more effective, and it's making everyone too busy having fun to fight. The chamber fell silent as the implication of her words began to sink in. Rodriguez had hit upon something. The galaxy had been trapped in a cycle of violence, using force and power to suppress conflict instead of resolving it. But now humanity had shown them an entirely new way, one that worked, even when the galaxy's best minds thought it was impossible. Let me be clear, she said, her voice rising slightly with the weight of her conviction. What we are proposing is a future where we build together instead of tear down. A future where instead of relying on force, we use our minds, our creativity, and our shared humanity to come up with solutions. It's not about being non-combatants. It's about being better. It's about using our differences to make us stronger, not weaker. She paused, letting the final statement linger in the air. And if you want proof, just look at the results. Her words hung in the air as she stood before the council, waiting for a response. The chamber was thick with the weight of history, with an ancient tension between war and peace, between destruction and creation. But for the first time, the council saw something different, something they had never considered. Could it really be possible for peace to become the new war? Could they truly evolve beyond the destructive patterns of the past? Rodriguez waited for their answer, the future of the galaxy hanging on her every word.